Governor Pete Ricketts was sworn in as Nebraska's 40th governor on January 5th or January 8th, 2015, after winning the 2014 election, and he was recently just re-elected in 2018. Prior to his public life, he worked to support Nebraska entrepreneurs and startup companies. Born in Nebraska City and raised here in Omaha, Ricketts is the son of an entrepreneur and a public school teacher. Governor Ricketts and his wife, First Lady Suzanne Shore, live in Omaha with their 3 children, Roscoe, Margaret, and Eleanor. Ricketts graduated from Westside High School before attending the University of Chicago, where he earned his bachelor's degree and his MBA in marketing and finance. After graduating from that school, Ricketts returned to Omaha to work for Union Pacific before working as a customer services representative in Ameritrade, which was a family business. He went on to hold several leadership roles in the company, including Senior Vice President of Strategy and Business Development and Chief Operating Officer. He is also a past board member of the TD Ameritrade's Board of Directors. He also serves as the director of the Chicago Cubs baseball team. Driven by a desire to give back to his community and create education and job opportunities, Governor Ricketts has taken on leadership roles in local and state organizations, and a few of those include the Mid-America Council of Boy Scouts, the Christian Urban Education Service, which is a Catholic school system here in North Omaha. Additionally, he served as a director for the Children's Scholarship Fund Foundation, the Nebraska Game and Parks Foundation, and he is a member of the Knights of Columbus. Governor Ricketts and his family attend St. Margaret Mary's Catholic Church here in Omaha. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming Mr. Governor Ricketts.
All right, thank you very much, Justin. I appreciate the invitation and the introduction. Thank you. And, somebody gonna do that? They're gonna have to, I don't stand behind a podium generally, so if somebody wants to move that around, they can. But I'll be kind of moving a little bit, depending on how long far this cord goes. But I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be here tonight. What Justin asked me to do is just talk a little bit about some of the things that we have going on with regard to state government and how my faith life has impacted that. And then I'll probably maybe hit a little bit stuff on maybe the economic development stuff. And then we'll do questions and answers, and I'll do that until Justin tells me I have to stop. Does that sound fair? All right, great. Well, Justin covered a little bit about my background. Grew up here in Omaha, went to Christ the King, and then went away to school in Chicago. Was in Chicago for about 10 years, going to school and working, going to school, working, and then came back to Omaha a little over 25 years ago. And as you mentioned, I came back, worked at Union Pacific, then landed at my family business, which is now called TD Ameritrade. At that time, it was just Ameritrade. Actually, at the time I started, it was called TransTerra. And worked my way up and eventually became the Chief Operating Officer. And that's when I made that jump to get involved in politics. And the reason I wanted to talk about that is because Father Toby actually mentioned that a little bit, or talked a little about that in his homily, about what are you called to do, right? Because, and Adam was actually asking about this as well, how'd you make that jump from business to politics? And for me at least, it was about that calling, that you're supposed to do something. And when you have that, it's really powerful. And that's one of the things that we all got to remember. God has a plan for all of us in life. Part of our job is to discern what that is and then carry it out. And when you do that, there's incredible power there. Father talked a little bit about, I'm so helpless, I'm so small. We're talking about Gideon. But really, when you are doing what you're supposed to be doing, that's incredibly powerful. That power of one can absolutely change the world. And that's what we all have to search for, is what are we supposed to be doing? And so I was the Chief Operating Officer at Ameritrade back in 2005. And we actually hosted Senator Chuck Hagel to come on a tour. And so he did the tour, and apparently we did a nice job for him, because later his office reached out and said, hey, have you ever thought about running for Senate? And I said, no, never. And I said, I'd even be a bad candidate, because I didn't know anything about what I was doing. But I actually thought about it for the next several months, and prayed on it, reflected, meditated, and I went back to him and said, I actually might be interested in running for Senate. What would it involve? And I had no idea what I was getting into, which is probably the only reason I agreed to do it. I'm not kidding. Like, if you knew. So I thought I worked hard at Ameritrade. Like in Ameritrade, I generally show up at 7 o'clock in the morning and go home about 6 or 7 at night. But it was only 5 nights a week. I mean, once in a while I'd travel on a weekend, but by and large, you know, I could be home on the weekends with my family. When you are in public office, and this is why you should give respect to anybody who serves in office, regardless of the position or the party. It is a 24-hour, 7-day a week, 365 days a year job. Now, they may not actually work all that time, but they are on call all that time. And especially if you're talking about running at a national office level, they're busy. But I'll even take it away. I'll take it down from the national level and talk about our state senators. Our state senators are part-time. Okay, they get paid $12,000 a year, and we have a session that runs from the beginning of January. This year was beginning of January until about the end of May, beginning of June. And then next year we'll go from the beginning of January until about the middle or third week of April. But they don't stop. First of all, and when they're in that time frame, they are working. You know, they start off first thing in the morning. They may have a legislative session that starts at, well, they usually show up before this, but they'll start at 9. And then for the first half of the session, they'll go till about noon, take a break for lunch, and then they'll start committee hearings. And committee hearings will generally start about 1:30 and may go till 10 o'clock at night. And they do that 5 days a week. And then they go home and talk to their constituents. And if you're in Omaha or Lincoln, that means you don't have to go too far. If you're in Scotts Bluff, you got a big trek to get back home. And so you're probably spending the weekend in Lincoln a lot of times. So you're spending time away from home. And then when you are out of session, the work doesn't end. There's interim studies. There's other things that go on. There's meeting with constituents. Oh, and by the way, if you're running for office, if you're running for re-election, you're knocking doors all the time. So anybody who runs for that public office is really devoting a lot of time. And while I may not agree with a lot of the policies that people have in the legislature, not even from the people at my own party sometimes, they all worked very hard to get there. They worked very, very hard to get there. It was not an accident. Actually, I remember, or I heard about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She was making some comment about somebody not being qualified to do some job or something, and somebody responded back to her on Twitter, well, what made you qualified to be Congresswoman? And she responded back with just a post of the election results. I'm like, that was probably the most elegant thing she could have said, because she won. And she had to work hard to get there. So I had no idea about that when I decided to start running for Senate back in 2005. I didn't know what I didn't know, and that's, like I said, one of the reasons why I probably did it. But I did feel that I was called to do that I was supposed to be doing that. And so we started running that campaign, and ultimately I lost badly, got my tail handed to me. But I got to tell you, that first time when you're giving those speeches, and I was only 40-something years old at the time, it's scary. But what I learned is that if you are doing what you're supposed to be doing and you rely upon the Holy Spirit and you ask for that help, it can be the easiest thing to do. And I know that sounds like a contradiction, and it kind of is. But it can be the hardest thing to do and the easiest thing to do at the same time, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and you rely upon the Holy Spirit. And the more you rely on the Holy Spirit, the easier it gets. Calling for that wisdom, asking for that strength. And that's very powerful. And so that help that you get when you're doing the right thing, when you're doing what God wants you to do, is amazing. And I certainly don't pretend to think it only happens in politics, right? It happens, we're all called to do different things. And the more that we understand what we're supposed to do, and do that, and be obedient, the stronger, more powerful that message is. The stronger, it makes it easier to do that. Now, here's the other thing I learned about that Senate race. God calls us to be obedient. He doesn't necessarily call you to win. Like I said, I got my tail handed to me in that race. I lost pretty badly. And so I kind of wondered, what the heck happened here? Like, God, wasn't I was supposed to do this, right? I thought this was the whole thing, right? You wanted me to do this. And I got crushed. But that also gets back to God has a plan. And it may not be our plan. And frankly, in hindsight, thank goodness I didn't get elected. what a terrible job being in the U.S. Senate is compared to being governor. I'm not kidding, it's great. Governor's the best job in the world. I had young kids at the time. I would have had to either leave them in Nebraska or move them to Washington, D.C. In fact, actually, my daughter, who was 7 at the time, after I lost, she's, you know, this is probably the most comforting thing that anybody said to me. She's like, Daddy, I know you're sorry you lost the race, but I'm happy you're going to be home. And that kind of makes it all okay. And so, when I went through that race, though, I made relationships with people who then I got bit by the political bug. So, you know, I gave up my job as being the chief operating officer at Ameritrade. And that's not the kind of job they hold open for you for 14 months, right? So I'm out of Ameritrade now. But I got bit by the political bug. I wanted to be involved. So I started a free market think tank and a watchdog group and stayed involved behind the scene. I became the national committee man for the Republican Party. And the relationships I made in 2006 in that race, and that I continued to develop in 07 and 08 and 09 and 10, they made it possible that when I ran in 14, I was able to be successful. In fact, I'm going to take a step back. So in the November 2012, right after the election, a friend of mine, Mike Flood, from Norfolk, was going to run for governor in 2014. And I was on board with his campaign. I was going to support him. In fact, I helped host a meeting here in Omaha to introduce him to people in the Omaha business community. And then his wife developed cancer. And so Mike, being the good man he is, dropped out of that race. And in fact, I remember him calling me in July, 4th of July weekend, 2013. He called me up and said, Pete, I am for sure not running this race for governor. And that's when I put together my team and announced September 8th or 9th, right after Labor Day, that I was going to be running for governor. And it was a very tough race. I was running against 5 other people who were all very qualified, and an attorney general, an auditor, state senators, a businessman. And I won by about 2,300 votes, which is about 1% of the electorate. It was a very close race. If I had not made the relationships in 2005 and 2006 when I ran for Senate and continued to maintain until I ran for governor in 2014, I would not have won. And see, that gets back to, again, God's got a plan. You just got to put your trust in him and let him worry about it. You take care of doing what you're supposed to do. Let God do what he's going to do. And that's a really, really powerful thing. And that's what we're all called to do. We all have a role in life. And that's what we're supposed to do. So I ran for governor. I won the primary, and then won the general election. And so Justin said, well, can you talk a little bit about how your faith shapes then what you're doing? And there's kind of 3 key things that I want to talk about with regard to that. First of all, the Life Runners, and thank you for showing me the t-shirt. I'd forgotten that. Thank you, I had that t-shirt on. You were there for that event. I was getting you guys confused with the Crossroad Walkers. You guys know them, right? I was thinking, but they weren't wearing blue shirts, because they're a different group. We always host them at residence when they walk across country for pro-life. Anyway, so pro-life, that's a big one. Second one, defending religious freedom. You may think, oh, that sounds easy in our country. It's not. I'm going to give you some examples. And then third, school choice. So I'm going to hit upon those 3 key issues, because what I want you all to do is think about this and get engaged with the Catholic Conference. Okay, Lauren, see, I just gave you a plug.
Thanks,
You're welcome. Get engaged with the Catholic Conference to be able to help on these when there's a legislative issue to be able to do that. So let's talk about pro-life first. So Nebraska is a pro-life state, right? You see that when you're driving down the highways and see the billboards, right? And you see it in the people who have the prayer vigils outside of abortion clinics, or who go on the Walk for Life, which is got to be the largest demonstration that we have in our state every year. So we're a pro-life state, and I believe that our government should reflect those values. Now, this is something that has been a bipartisan thing. Going back to 1991, for example, Beatrice Lebed's Omaha Center introduced legislation that would require minors to get parents to get notification if their minor child was going to have an abortion. And Mike Mike Foley, my current lieutenant governor, who was then in the legislature, passed legislation around fetal assault. And then Mike Flood, who I mentioned earlier, in 2010, with the help of Deb Fisher, passed the pain-capable child bill that basically ended abortion after 20 weeks in our state. We're the first state to do that. So we've had a lot of people who've been those pro-life warriors in our legislature. And when Mike Foley left, we actually were kind of missing that for a while, but we're starting to get that back. And so we passed other pro-life bills. Joni Albright is now really the person I would go to on pro-life bills. She's from Northeast Nebraska, and she helped us pass the Compassionate Care for Medically Challenging Pregnancies Act, which helps really inform families who have that terrible diagnosis that their preborn child has got a fatal condition, and helps connect them with hospice, perinatal hospice resources. We passed a Choose Life license plate bill so that people can show their pro-life on their car, and that money actually then goes to help our families, temporary assistance for needy families, so our TANF program, the money goes for that. Senator Albright has also passed legislation that will, this one was, we just passed LB 209, which requires doctors to inform women who have taken the abortion pill that it can be reversed within a certain period of time, so that they've got complete information about the decision they just made. We've worked with Erin Kopecki, who is Mother of the Year, on creating condolences cards for families that lose their children. So in all these ways, we're really trying to express the dignity of what that preborn child's life is about. And I think it's not just that, though. So the pro-life issue is an important issue. You know, trying to protect those preborn children that don't have a voice. We've got to be their voice for them. But that's not the end of what it means to be pro-life. What we did, the way I think about it for our state government, pro-life is how we express that for the people that we're serving as well. Not just that unborn child, but all the people we serve in the state of Nebraska. And I'll give you some examples. So before I took over as governor, so we have this 800 number, Access Nebraska. This is how people apply for economic assistance. So if you're looking for like food stamps or heating assistance or something like that, this is how you would apply through this 800 number. And in August of 2014, it was taking us nearly 24 minutes to answer the phone. That means some people are waiting a lot longer. And, okay, so Adam, I know you work for TD Ameritrade. Anybody else in here work for TD Ameritrade by chance? Trust me, if we took 24 minutes to answer the phone, we would not be in business. What does it say? And then here's the other thing too. Well, let's just say, stick with that one for a second. So what does that say to you? If you're one of those families that's looking for that help, and we take nearly 24 minutes to answer the phone, what does that say we, the state, think about you? Does it say we respect you, that we're making you wait that long on hold? Does it say we care about you? No, it doesn't. So one of the first things that we did is we focused on that. And this is just broadly how I'm bringing my experience in business to running government more like a business, make it more effective, more efficient, more customer focused. But we set a goal, 5 minutes or less in that queue. And we went to work on streamlining the process to make sure we could do that. So doing things like picking up the mail at 2 in the morning instead of 9 in the morning, so it could be opened and scanned and ready to go when the call center people showed up. And by focusing on things like that, we've hit our goal now of 5 minutes or less for the last 42 months in a row. And it used to take us 40 days, in November 2015, to process those food stamp applications. We set a goal of 10 days. We actually hit 10 days last year. We slipped this year. Now we're about 13 days. So we got to get back on target there about what we're doing. But again, think about that. If you're one of those families that needs that food assistance, and we're taking 40 days to process your application, again, what does that say to you from the state? How does that make you feel? And you're like, I need this food assistance, I gotta wait over a month? Really? So how we go about providing our services also expresses how we treat people with respect, that they're our customers. And that's one of the things I've really focused on. When we're talking about those families we want to help, they are our customers. And it's our job to treat them that way. And that's what we're really trying to change the culture of state government to do, to be focused on that customer service. Think of them like customers and treat them like customers. Do a good job serving them. And that's one of the ways that we actually live up to our values. So that's another thing when I'm talking about whether we're talking about pro-life legislation or how we run state government, that all falls in that category as well. So the second thing has to do with how we think about defending religious freedom. Now in our Constitution, Article 1-4, it says that everybody has that natural and indefeasible right to worship God Almighty in accordance with the dictates of your conscience, your own conscience. And we may say, well, yeah, we take that for granted here. This is part of who we are as America, right? This is what our founders believed in. That's absolutely all true. But we even here cannot take it for granted. So, for example, in Canada, the province of Quebec passed a law saying you could not wear any sort of religious items when you were working. You couldn't wear a crucifix, you couldn't wear hijab. So we think of Canada as being pretty liberal, democratic, democracy like us, but yet they're passing things to restrict religious freedom. Now I worked with Speaker Scheer, who's Speaker of the Legislature, he's from Norfolk, and we passed a law that would allow people to be able to do that in your schools. Allow a teacher, for example, to wear that crucifix or that hijab in their work. We also had a very recent example with a friend of mine, Brian Bisher. Brian Bisher is an attorney here in town, and he was up for a federal appointment to the federal bench to become a judge. And during his confirmation hearing, I think it was Kamala Harris, as a matter of fact, asked him if he would resign his position in the Knights of Columbus if he were to become a judge. Because she said, her words, the Knights of Columbus is an extremist organization. Really, the largest Catholic fraternal organization in the country, which every year donates millions of dollars and millions of volunteer hours toward helping kids, is an extremist organization. And she wanted to make a religious test for him taking a federal job. That is against our Constitution. And I want to credit Senator Ben Sasse because he got up on the floor of the U.S. Senate and introduced a resolution that there would, to reaffirm that we don't make religious tests for taking government jobs. And it passed unanimously. So we do have to think about defending religious freedom each and every day and making sure that we're doing that. We do, actually, one of the ways we do it at the Capitol is every year we have a ceremony to mark our religious freedom and talk about how important it is. So we all have to be on guard, even here in this country, that we protect and zealously defend our religious freedom. And the third thing I was going to hit upon is school choice. Because not every child learns the same way, and your zip code shouldn't dictate whether or not you get a good education or your parent can choose where you go to school. Now, this is one of the things, too, that we may take for granted here, that the parent has the right to decide the child's education. We can choose to send them to the public schools, and we've got very good public schools here in our state. I'm a product of public schools. Or we can decide to send them to another school of our choice. And if you want to send them to a Catholic school, obviously we've got, Justin mentioned CUES. Sacred Heart is a mission school in North Omaha. There's no tuition charge. And they do a wonderful job of educating those kids. But most of the time, if you're going to a Catholic school, you got to pay the tuition to be able to go. And a lot of families can't afford it. Now we've got things like CUES and Children's Scholarship Fund to be able to help families be able to afford that. But I would like to see those children have a great shot at getting that education, if that's what their parents choose for them, that Catholic education, and be able to do things like maybe even have a scholarship. We've actually got a bill on that, LB 670. You can help out on this upcoming legislative session. Luann Linehan introduced that bill. We don't have a charter law. We don't have vouchers in this state. In fact, from a school choice perspective, we are really behind almost all the other states. And so that would be a way, that would be legislation we could pass to be able to help those kids be able to attend the school of their choice, be able to get a Catholic education if that's what they wanted. And we could structure it in a way that it's not going to do any harm to any of the public schools. Again, remember, I'm a product of public schools. We actually, Derek's a teacher at Westside. That's where I graduated from. So we can do both. There are ways to do it. But we also need your help to be able to get it done, to be able to get that support, to get enough senators to vote for these types of bills. And I'm going to take a little bit of a second to digress here for a second as well, because one of the things we see in our country is a lot of talk about socialism. In fact, there was a 2016 Gallup poll of 18 to 29-year-olds. Oh, that kind of looks like your group here. And they were asked their favorability on how they viewed socialism. And 55% said they viewed socialism favorably. Now, 90% said they viewed entrepreneurship favorably, and 78% said they viewed free enterprise favorably. Now, those three concepts don't go together, right? You can't have a socialist government and a social society and have really robust entrepreneurialism or free market. They just don't go together. And one of the things when we're hearing about from some of our candidates that are out there on the campaign trails, they're talking about, like, say, free college education. Well, Germany has free college education. But here's the deal. You have to take a test. And you start taking those tests. Actually, I got a friend of mine. His kids are in Germany right now. And you start taking those tests when you're like 13, 14, 15, 16. And if you don't do well enough on those tests, you don't get to go to college. They put you down a different career path. And here's the other thing about Germany. It's illegal to homeschool. Illegal. It's part of what you give up under a social society. You know, a lot of times when we talk about socialism, we're thinking about, oh, Venezuela, China, Russia. And those are obviously terrible regimes that I don't think we want to live in. But when we think about some of the more socialist governments in Europe, we don't understand the things that you give up as part of that society. And something that I certainly think it was a fundamental right. In fact, it was a law case in Nebraska that really set this back like in 1923, that parents have the right to choose how their kids get educated. We take that as a fundamental right here in the United States, not Germany. Can't homeschool. You as a parent can't decide to keep your child home and school at home. So that's part of some of those give-ups when you're in a social society. You give up your freedoms. Anyway, so I went off on a soapbox there, tangent. But getting back to school choice, we can pass better, we are behind the times here in Nebraska. We can pass better legislation to allow kids to be able to, and parents to be able to choose where they go get their education. So those are some of the kind of the topics where, again, I think about, you know, where does my Catholic faith intersect with legislation and what we're doing there. But it also just gets to the broader picture of what the vision for my administration is. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we can go to questions and answers. You can ask more about it there if you want. But we set a vision for the administration. The vision for the state of Nebraska is to grow Nebraska. And by that I mean create more and better paying jobs so people like you can find their careers right here in our state. That's what it's about. And we do that. We have 4 pillars of that strategy. The first is making sure that our young people have that great education and connect them to great paying jobs. The second is making sure that we're running government more effectively and more efficiently, kind of like what I was telling you before, so we can do a good job serving people. The third thing is making sure that we're being good stewards of your taxpayer dollars. It actually flows from number 2. And when we're good stewards of your taxpayer dollars, we control our spending. That's how we provide tax relief. So, for example, we've nearly doubled the property tax credit relief fund since I've been governor because we control our spending. We can put more money into tax relief. That's the only way sustainable tax relief works, is by controlling spending. It's kind of like profit in business. If you control your spending, your revenues go up, you got profit. In government, if you control your spending and your revenues go up, you can have tax relief. That's the way it works. So that's kind of that third pillar. And then the fourth pillar is going out and making sure we promote our state. Telling the world we got the best place in the world. Telling people that they ought to invest in Nebraska or buy our products. This is why I go on trade missions. I've been to Japan twice, China twice, the European Union, Canada, Mexico twice. I'm going to Vietnam and back to Japan here in September. I'll be going to Germany in November. And again, it's about trying to open up markets for our farmers, ranchers, business people to sell their products overseas and get investment back here as well. You know, for example, Kawasaki's had an over 40-year relationship with the city of Lincoln. And we, every time we've been in Japan, have visited with them. And they've been here. In fact, I've gone with them to visit Boeing so that, you know, again, help them develop their business here in Nebraska. When they were looking to create their first aerostructures division in the United States, they had the choice of Nebraska and New York. And in part because of the relationships we developed, they picked Nebraska. They invested $12.5 million, created 50 new jobs, including one for a guy by the name of Eric Jones. Now, Eric Jones worked on one of their other production lines, and he volunteered for the new aerostructures line. And he was made a supervisor, sent to Japan for 3 months worth of training, and now has an even better job to help take care of his family. And folks, that's what economic development's about. It's about making those opportunities for families like Eric Jones's so that he can send his kids to school, go on that family vacation, and enjoy the good life here in our state. That's what economic development is about, creating those opportunities for Nebraska families. All right, now I covered a lot of stuff in a very short period of time. So Justin, what time are we going to? So I talked for 35 minutes, which was 10 minutes longer than you told me to. Sorry about that. What time do you want to knock off?
We'll do about 10 or 15 minutes.
10 or 15 minutes Q&A. All right. Who's got a question? Yeah.
So you talked about how kind of your faith informs your politics and your job as a public servant. I think in most cases they align. There's been some cases where your position maybe conflicts or disagrees with some of the organs of the church, like the death penalty or expanding Medicaid. So I was curious how you reflect or pray on those differences and kind of how you make sure that you're making the right decision.
Yeah, so I'll take the two that you mentioned. So for those of you who didn't hear, he said, hey, so generally you're talking about how your faith informs what you're doing, and most of the time it aligns. What happens when it doesn't align, like it didn't appear to with the death penalty and Medicaid expansion? So let's take both of those. So the death penalty was one that when I ran for Senate, I did a lot of reflection and prayer and reading about. And it is actually one of those things that the Catholic Church, up until very, very recently, thought was a matter of judgment. You know, okay, so it was up to the person to decide. I think it was in a Catholic Catechism 2267, really outlines kind of that it is permissible in certain circumstances to be in favor of the death penalty and not be out of line of what the church believes. In fact, Cardinal Ratzinger, when he was still cardinal, not a pope, wrote, he was kind of the chief theologian for the Catholic Church, and actually wrote on a topic that touched upon this about abortion and how that's an intrinsic evil, but things like a just war and the death penalty were not. And that you could still take communion and be in line with the Catholic Church, again, based upon what your conscience was driving you in the circumstances around the death penalty and a just war, but not on abortion. And so I actually had done that reflection and searching back in 2005. And in fact, if you look at almost all of our church fathers and all the folks, if you look at a lot of readings, really endorse the same position. So, you know, from my perspective, when I think about public safety, which I am responsible for as governor in our state, that's part of what goes into that. And so, again, it gets back to judgment and where you think what your conscience is telling you to do, and asking for that guidance of the Holy Spirit. And again, if you look back on the history of our church, the church hasn't always been right? Nobody in this room, I think, would think the Inquisition was a good thing. So I think that there is, and I think our Catholic faith does allow us to be able to disagree with that. Again, based on principles that we've got. Doesn't mean we're always going to come to the same conclusion, but I think our Catholic faith does allow us. On Medicaid expansion, actually one of the things I talked to some of the folks in our church about is like, hey, you know, when you're supporting Medicaid expansion, you are supporting paying for more abortions, right? You know that. And so that's kind of one of the things that influenced me on the Medicaid expansion is, you know, Medicaid pays for some things like abortion-inducing drugs. And is that really how we want our taxpayer dollars to go? And actually, I think that, and frankly, one of my other considerations on Medicaid expansion was, Medicaid was a program designed to help truly vulnerable populations, women, children, elderly, disabled. What we all voted for is going to change the nature of Medicaid. It will now greatly expand to cover single able-bodied adults. That's primarily who it's going to be because, again, if you've got a child already, you can qualify for Medicaid. Single able-bodied adults, I think there's better solutions that we could have found to be able to provide that insurance coverage. Now, it's a moot point now. The state voted for it. We're working to implement it. But that's, again, one of the things where I think there was room to disagree with regard to where the church was with regard to it and, how they perceived it and kind of how I was looking at some of the issues along with it. But it gets back to you got to be thoughtful about it, you got to think about it, you got to pray about it, and talk to people about it. I talked to priests about it to get their perspective. Again, not necessarily you're always going to agree, but getting that different perspective to people to share with. Yeah, back.
So Governor, you talked about how you felt called to run for public office, and there was a discernment that went into that. And just kind of knowing how we need more Catholic, pro-life public officials to kind of step up. Can you kind of speak into your discernment process and kind of what went into that for maybe some of us here who are thinking about that?
Oh, well, what went into my discernment process to decide to run for office because we need more people to run for office? That was the question. So, I got to tell you, it really was, like I said, my first reaction was, no, that's a bad idea. And I think it's just being open to it and thinking about it and praying on it. So a lot of it was just kind of internal prayer, just when I was praying, asking God for guidance on what am I supposed to be doing. And then I think it's also about talking with people that you trust and love and ask them because they also know you too. So I spent a lot of time talking with my wife. But I think for me, it was about prayer meditation. Just, cutting out the rest of the world and trying to focus on that. Don't get distracted with a lot of other things when you're trying to focus. It's like, with any relationship, if, you've got a significant other, you want to be present for that person when you're together. It's no different with Jesus. We got to be present with Jesus. We can't be distracted doing other things when we're trying to have that conversation. And I think probably if that would probably be the best advice I'd have with regard to it. And then I would also say that, public service is a very noble calling. Now, granted, it's a little self-serving for me to say that because I'm governor, but it really is. Like I said, I thought I worked hard in Ameritrade. That was nothing compared to now. But we need people to do it. And having people being willing to spend the time to think about it and pray about it and maybe talk to somebody you know and trust, it's a great thing. I think that people should be encouraged to get involved in public service. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that you have to run for office. It could be that you're helping somebody run for office. You're maybe recruiting somebody to run for office. Maybe you see somebody who is that pro-life candidate and you're like, hey, have you ever thought about running for office? Sometimes that's all it takes is just to ask, have you ever thought about that? And that gets it clicked off. How do you know you're not part of what God's plan is to talk to somebody else into running for office and you get out of it? Right? So get somebody else to do it. Or support that person when they run. Help them out by knocking doors or making phone calls or putting up yard signs. That's another way to help support people. Or just call them every now and then if they run for office, say, hey, you're doing a great job. Thanks for what you're doing. That kind of thing. So there's a lot of ways to be involved in running for public office that don't actually involve you actually being that elected official. And so I would encourage all of you to think about that. And like helping out with Lauren Garcia when she's trying to get a pro-life bill passed would be a great way to do it, right, Lauren? Yep. See, that would be a great way to help do it. Help make phone calls to senators, go visit them, say, hey, this is why this is important. And that's another way to get involved. But for me, it was just about to actually pull the trigger and make the step. It was about talking with my wife, and it was about a lot of just a alone time praying, focused on that to decide if that's what I was supposed to do. Yeah.
Governor Ricketts, I wanted to thank you for all the work you've done for the unborn and for expanding healthcare. I really liked how you talked about obedience to God through all this plan. But I was wondering, back to the death penalty question, it seems to me that in our prudential judgment, we should submit ourselves to the authority of the Pope. Blessed Pius X said that those who are obstinate to the authority and definitions of the Holy Father cannot achieve salvation. And with this, how do you justify the killing, especially of Carrie Moore, right after Pope Francis declared the death penalty was inadmissible in all cases?
Yeah, but I think it gets back to just the answer I gave you already. That I had thought about this, prayed about it a long time, and came to that decision before the Pope even did that. And,
The execution was after.
excuse me?
The execution was after.
The execution was after, but my decision to support it came a decade, or actually more than a decade before that. And that's where, again, without the heat of the battle of going on whatever the execution was, more than a decade earlier, I had thought through this, prayed through this, and came to that conclusion. And it was the conclusion that, frankly, the Catholic Church had held for a long, long time. So, again, I guess that's the way I looked at it, and so my answer is pretty much the same that I just gave over here. Yeah.
I appreciate your stance on school choice, but something that's really important to me is families, particularly Catholic families, with children with special needs. And so can you talk a little bit about maybe anything that we could do or that the government could do from a state perspective for funding for families with children with special needs who maybe want that Catholic enrichment for their kids?
Yeah, and actually, I think, and Derek, you probably know more about this than I do, but I think what you see is there's a great partnership with public schools and Catholic schools to be able to address some of those needs. That the public schools really do help out a lot, and I think the other thing you're seeing is more Catholic schools are stepping up to help fund some of those needs as well for those Catholic families that are in those Catholic schools. So, for me, again, it's just part of making sure we got a good relationship between the Catholic schools and the public schools. They don't need to be at odds. We really shouldn't. I think there's a lot of people who think, oh, you either got to be for Catholic schools or you got to be, for public schools. And really, what we want to be for is great education and making sure kids get that great education. And that's why when we've got special needs kids that want to go to a Catholic school, part of it's making sure that the Catholic schools have got a good relationship with the public schools so they can help out. And it's also about making sure that we as Catholics are helping support those Catholic schools to be able to support those kids, right? Because that gets back to funding too. And so that's where I think you do see more Catholic schools now are saying, hey, that is part of our mission. And so, frankly, we got to go out there and raise the money to be able to do it. We got to go out there and say, this is what we need to do as part of our mission as Catholics. And that's what I think part of that joint partnership on both sides. Yeah, Phil.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for answering all these hard questions with grace too and everything. I have an easier question. I'm just curious, you mentioned having like a team around you to help support you as you were making the race to be governor. I'm just curious how you decided who you reach out to support you, who's going to be on your team, and how did you decide who those people would be?
You mean when I was running for governor, when I ran for governor, you mean?
Yeah.
So the question was, how did I decide who was going to be on my team when I was running for governor? And a lot of it got back to the people that I met and developed relationships with when I ran for Senate. What was that, 6 years earlier? So it really was about, because I had maintained those relationships, I kind of knew who I wanted to help me. So the guy who ran my campaign, for example, is now my chief of staff. And I knew that, and frankly, as I was going through this process, there were two people I knew, and this gentleman, Matt Miltberger, who's my chief of staff now, was one of them. There were two people I knew that if they weren't going to be on my team, I wasn't going to run. Because I knew I couldn't win if I didn't have their help. And so with those kind of two people as kind of my core, the other person was Jessica Flanagan. With those two people that I knew were going to help me, we started building a team, again, just leveraging their networks of people they knew, to be able to bring on people to help out, whether it was with communication or finance or whatever it was going to be. And then we used the same, once I got elected governor, we used the same sort of thing to try and find the best people we could, and for all of our positions. We did something actually was kind of unusual for state government. Private sector does it every day. We actually raised private dollars, because I wasn't governor yet when I got elected. We raised private dollars to hire 2 search firms to help us find our head for Health and Human Services and Corrections, 2 organizations that were in bad need of reform, and then Transportation and Economic Development, 2 organizations key for growing our state. And so we did national job searches. And so we actually ended up ultimately hiring 3 out of the 4 people from outside the state. And then for the positions we didn't have the money to do the job search, we tried to network. And so we actually, for example, brought in my Department of Natural Resources head from Wyoming. The guy who runs environmental quality came up from Missouri. But we also hired people from the private sector. The guy who runs my banking was actually a former state senator, has his own private company here in Nebraska. We asked him to come in. Another guy who I knew, who had been involved in politics, state senator, has his own business, he came in to be our tax commissioner. And then some people like Rhonda Lamb, who runs our Department of Motor Vehicles, does a fantastic job. She was already there, so we kept her. Bruce Ramsey in insurance, same deal. So we had a mix of people from inside the state, outside the state, people who were government people who were private sector people. So we really tried to find the best people we could for each of those positions. But like I said, for when I was running, it kind of got back to those two core people, Matt and Jessica. If they hadn't been on my team, I wouldn't have run. Yeah.
So we're a group of young professionals, and one of the constant challenges for Nebraska is a brain drain, especially young people leaving the state. I just was wondering, what things the state was doing to kind of prevent that and encourage, folks to stay here in Nebraska and boost the economy here.
Right. So that gets back to that whole strategy to grow Nebraska and the 4 pillars that support that. Making sure we got the right trained, skilled people and connecting to those great paying jobs, that we're running government more like a business, making sure that we're providing tax relief and that we're promoting ourselves. So those 4 things, what we're using is trying to make sure that we've got an environment where companies want to invest and create the career that you want to have. And for the last 3 years in a row, we've actually been recognized nationally by Site Selection Magazine, which is a big company that does site selection advising for companies when they're going to start a new company or expand or whatever. We won the Governor's Cup for the most economic development projects per capita of any state in the country 3 years in a row. In fact, for 3 years in a row, we've had more economic development projects than North Dakota, South Dakota, and Kansas combined. And if we had just had 4 more last year, we could have added Minnesota to that list too. It would have more than all 4 of those states combined. In fact, we punch way above our weight when it comes to this. We've had more economic development projects last year than bigger states like New Jersey, sorry Adam, South Carolina, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Washington State, just to name a few. We've received the Silver Shovel Award from Site Development Magazine, kind of a competitor to, or Area Development Magazine, kind of a competitor to Site Selection, for their Silver Shovel Award for some of the companies we brought in, like Facebook, who just opened up their data center. Amazon, their new facility. We've got great companies like that are investing in our state. So those are the sorts of the things that help us great. We're ranked #1 by Mercatus Institute at George Mason University as the most fiscally stable state in the country. Forbes says we're the we got the second best regulatory environment. We've actually got the second highest workforce participation rate. Nebraskans love to work, we know that. We've had the 3rd highest wage growth of any state in the country since 2014. CNBC says we're the 4th best place to get a job, 4th best state in this country to get a job. And Forbes says we're the 5th best state overall for business. So we are receiving national accolades for the environment that we're creating here that helps make it easy for companies to invest. And we do that by, again, trying to make sure they got the people to hire, that we're cutting the red tape so it's easy to do business with us, all those sort of things that create that environment so that we don't have that brain drain. And then one of the other things we just talked about launching, just announced this at my Economic Development Conference, is our talent portal, which is, it's called nebraskascalling.com. And the idea is to get people who are thinking about Nebraska or from Nebraska to take a look at us, draw them in, and see if we can connect them to whatever community they're interested in, to be able to see what jobs might be available, so it connects to our jobs work site, Department of Labor, but it also connects to community, so if you want to find out about quality of life or things like that. Again, the idea is to actually start proactively recruiting people to come back to the state, especially people who maybe have a connection to us already, and create that tool for people. All right, Justin's giving me the hook. Thank you again very much for the opportunity to be here today. Very much appreciated, and would again just encourage you to think about how you can get involved and help somebody who is in public office, help an organization like the Catholic Conference be able to push forward on good public policy, because it really does matter when you get involved. Sometimes the state center may only get a half a dozen emails or phone calls about an issue, and that may be the way that informs how they think about it. So your voice does matter. It makes a difference. And Lauren, raise your hand again one last time. She can help you. All right, thank you all very much. Have a great night.
Thank you very much, Governor Ricketts, for coming in and giving us your perspective and also leading our state during challenging times around the country, and obviously creating a good business environment for all of us to have the careers that we enjoy. As a token of our thank you, this is St. Joseph the Worker statue,
thank you.
which is our patron saint. So we ask that you display it in your office in the Capitol. Pray for us when you think or when you see it, and we'll do the same for you.
All right, great, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, appreciate it.